Hello and welcome to Mags and Tilson, and welcome to part 6 of our 1971 Sportster XLCH Sparkling America paint scheme. Okay, now this week we're going to talk about low and about high grade paints, and talk about activators and which brands not to mix and what brands that we mix. So we'll get into all of that before we start actually mixing and spraying on our expensive paint over here. So I want to get you guys started off on the right foot and get into all the basics before we get into the fun part of spraying paint. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to Max and Tilson. Today we're going to talk about different brands of paints and activators and different brands of all the primers and activators, and talk about high grade and low grade paints. Okay, let's talk about House of Color that I have here. I have jet black and it has an activator with it. Now you have to remember, you have to match your activator brand to your paint brand. Okay, now this is House of Color KU 152 activator. It's a mid-grade activator to go with my S2-25 jet black House of Color paint. So these two are also a match. Okay, it's very important. Now also we have a Limco brand paint over here, and you have to remember Limco, you have to match all their activators and all their urethane reducers with the Limco brand. You can't say take an X brand reducer and use that to reduce a Limco brand paint, because Limco has all their own paints and all their own reducers and activators, and you cannot mix them with a different brand, because if you do, you'll have a disaster on your hands and you'll have to strip all that expensive material off and start all over again. So you gotta remember, no matter what brand of paint you're going to buy, whether it's a low grade or a high grade paint, you still have to match the brands of activators, and all the reducers have to match that brand, okay? And also on all the primers as well. Okay, now the primer here, I have a high build primer and I have an activator that goes along with it. So this activator brand has to be compatible with this high build primer brand. It's very important. So these two match. This high-tech primer, high build primer, and activator have to match each other. Super important. Also, we want to talk about high and low grade paints as well. Okay, what's the difference between a high and a low grade paint? I've been to the automotive paint store and I bought the birch white. I had custom mixed for my 1971 Harley Davidson Sportster Sparkling America paint scheme. I'll be using birch white for that, and I had to have that custom mixed. Now, the paint codes you may see online are not going to tell your paint guy on how to mix this paint. Okay, they have special codes for that. And if you can see on the side of my can that he's got each code that he used of what he had to mix in to this birch white Harley Davidson paint to get it to the tone that I wanted. So what he did, he mixed a sample and had me go into the back room and look at it. So I had to okay it and see if that was the tone of birch white that I was after. And I was after the 1971 Harley Davidson birch white because I wanted to make the 1971 Harley Davidson Sparkling America paint job, and I needed a certain tone of that birch white that would go along with that paint scheme. And the guy mixed it up for the first time, and I had to look at it, and I okayed it because it looked perfect. And I know what that paint tone looks like. And when I seen him mix up the first batch of birch white to match my 1971 Sportster XLCH, and I knew right away that he mixed it perfectly, and I okayed him to mix the whole quart of it. So this is a higher end paint that I'm going to use for the Harley Davidson birch white Sparkling America paint scheme. Now, on the other hand, when I was talking to my paint guy before I bought this brand of paint, he asked me if I first wanted to go with this brand of paint. And this is a Limco paint. And I used it before, and it's not a high grade paint. And I told him, no, I don't want to use that brand. I want to go with higher grade paint instead. He started to laugh of birch white, and I had to okay the tone of it and make sure that it was the exact tone that I wanted. Because birch white comes in different tones, from the old style birch white to the old bikes to the newer style birch white. And I wanted the 1971 tone birch white. So it turned out perfect just the way that he mixed it. I okayed it, and he mixed up a full quart of it. So I have that right here. It's a high grade paint. Now let's talk about clear coats too. I have Nasan clear coat, and Nasan clear coat has its own activator as well. So the Nasan activator goes with the Nasan clear. Okay, now I have a mid-temperature grade activator that goes with the Nasan clear coat. So the mid-temperature Nasan activator is 483-78. And I also have a different Nasan activator. It's 483-79. And the difference is the -79 is meant for high temperatures when it's really hot outside. And then I would use a high temperature activator. I have a mid-grade Nasan activator, which is going to go with the Nasan clear. And it's a mid-temperature, and I'll be painting in the 70s. And so I needed the mid-temperature activator to go with the clear coats. So you got to match those as well if you're going to be painting in mid-temperature or in high temperatures, okay? But the Nasan clear coat, you can use that on different brand 2K paints. It's not a problem. You can use Nasan 2K clear coat on 2K Limco paint, or House of Color paint, or an RM paint, or any 2K paint. It's not a problem. You could use the Nasan clear on those different brands of 2K paints. Now let's talk about high grade and low grade paints. What's the difference between, say, this House of Color, which is a very high grade paint? I've used it before. I love the way that it lays down. And I used it on my 1968 XLCH because I was doing the original Harley Davidson 1968 paint scheme on my XLCH, and I went with this S2-25 Jet Black from House of Color. It's beautiful paint. It's very high grade paint. And also on the opposite hand of that, on my 1970 XLH, on my gold one that you've seen, for the first time I used this brand of paint. I used Limco for the very first time. And I'll tell you the difference between the Limco brand and the high grade, say, House of Color brand, or this high grade brand right here that I have, okay? There's a big difference between House of Color brand, say, and so the Limco brand. So let's go to the whiteboard over here, and I'm going to show you the difference between a low grade paint and, say, House of Color high grade paint. So let's go to the whiteboard and we'll talk about that. Okay, let's talk about the difference between a high grade paint and a low grade paint. Okay, the House of Color that I have, the Jet Black, now as I said, I used that on my original 1968 Sportster XLCH to reproduce the original factory paint scheme on that bike, and I went with House of Color Jet Black. And the difference between the low grade and the high grade is that, say, when I sprayed on the high grade House of Color, which is a very high grade paint brand, it laid down beautifully flat as a pancake, and it had a nice shine to it as well. And I was so surprised that when I first used House of Color paint, that it laid down so beautiful and so flat. Now on the other end of that, I used the Limco brand on my 1970 Sportster XLH, and I used Limco brand for the first time in that gold color that I have on my bike. It was mid-October, and it was getting kind of late in the year, and it was getting cold outside, and I had one day to paint this bike and to put on that gold, right? You know, to put on the clear coat as well. So I put the Limco paint on my 1970 Sportster, and the difference between the high grade and the low grade paint is that when I spray the Limco paint on, it looks like this. It comes out rough. It lays down rough on your paint surfaces. It doesn't lay down beautiful and flat like the high grade House of Color does, okay? And the Limco has peaks and the valleys, peaks and the valleys, peaks and the valleys. And what you have to do you have to stop. You have to put extra coats of paint on with the low grade paint, because you're going to have to stop and let your paint job dry, and you're going to have to wet sand it smooth and use about 1,000 grit. Start out with maybe an 800 grit wet sandpaper and then move up to about 1,000 grit wet sandpaper, so you can level out that low grade paint before you put your clear coat on it. And that's the difference between a high grade and a low grade paint. With the high grade paint, all you need to do is spray it on your surface. It lays flat as a pancake, and when you're finished applying maybe 3 or 4 coats of it, you go to the bench and you clean out your spray gun and you put the clear in your spray gun. You go right back to it and start painting clear right over your paint over here. The high grade paint could do it automatically. You do it right away. You don't have to wait till it dries. You don't have to sand it down. You don't have to wet sand it. All you got to do is change your paint gun out, or to clean out your paint gun, and just load up with your clear coat and go right over your high grade paint, and you'll have a gorgeous paint job. I mean, real high quality paint job. You know, with the low grade, you have to stop what you're doing. You got to let it dry. You have to wet sand it smooth, and it's going to be dull when you wet sand it, but when you put the clear coat on it, it's going to shine really well. You'll have a nice deep shine, but you have to use more coats of your clear coat. Okay? Now, I'm going to tell you a little story that when I used this low grade paint for the first time, it was about mid-October. It was getting cold outside. I had only one day to paint because it was about 67 degrees that day, and the following days and weeks were going to be really cold, and that was the end of my paint job. So I had to get in this paint job really, really quick that day, and I didn't have time to fool around. So I put the lower grade Limco paint on, and like I said, it laid rough like this. It hit the lows and the peaks and the valleys and the peaks, and I says, oh, I don't have time to let this paint dry and to wet sand it down to about 1,000 wet dry grit paper, so then the surface is going to be smooth enough for me to put the clear coats on. So I said, you know what I'm going to have to do here? I'm going to have to let it be, and I'm going to have to cheat on this and start loading up my clear coat. So what the clear coat had to do is to fill in all these little valleys here inside my paint job, and I had to build up my clear coat to fill all this in, so it would be even going all the way across, so it would be smooth going all the way across. So I had to really load up the clear coat on this low grade paint. I don't remember how many coats of clear coat that I had to use to fill in these low valleys of the low grade paint, so it can be smooth to go all the way across like the high grade paint. But I probably put on about maybe between 7 and 9 coats of clear coat, so I can fill in all these valleys here and make it shine really well, so the paint job wouldn't look rough. And I had to smooth it out with a lot of extra coats of clear coat. It was a waste of clear coat, which is very expensive, and it was not something that I would normally do. Like I said, it was the first time that I used this low grade Limco paint, and I was very disappointed with it because of the rough finish that it came out of my gun. And I used all kinds of adjustments on my spray gun as well. I adjusted like the volume and the air pressures, and I messed with my gun for a long time. And even though I began to adjust my spray gun and all the volumes and the PSI coming out of my spray guns, no matter what I did, this lower grade Limco paint would not lay flat. It was very rough, and there was nothing I can do except load on the clear coat and to fill in all the valleys so I could have a shiny and even surface. And like I said, I had to put on quite a few coats of clear coat, waste a lot of my expensive clear coat, and to build up that paint job so it was smooth and it was shiny and it was deep. And I was very disappointed with the lower grade Limco paint. I'll never go back to it. And that's why I always buy high grade paints, because it's about the application of high grade paint. It lays so beautifully flat. It saves you so much work. And all you have to do is once you achieve your tone and coats of your high grade paint, I usually just use 3 to 4 coats of my base color. Say if it's going to be black or red or blue or green. And then I stop at about 3 to 4 coats, and I just go to the bench and I just clean out my spray gun and load it up with clear and go back and start spraying clear coat over the top of my high grade paints. I do that right away. I don't wait for it to cure or anything. It's got an activator in it anyway. It dries pretty quickly. So by the time I have to clean out my gun, it takes me about maybe half an hour. You know, I'm taking my time and I'm cleaning it out, and I reload it with a bunch of clear, and I start spraying over my high grade paints right away. And it only needs probably about 4 coats of clear. If I decide to go a little bit more, that's okay. What you don't want to do is go too thick with your paint on your paint surfaces, because what's going to happen if you load up a lot of paint material and a lot of clear coat material and a lot of primer material, then your paint job is going to be very, very thick, and it's going to crack. It's going to begin to crack and the spider web all over the place. So you're much better off keeping your paint jobs thin, just enough of your base coat, like say your black or your white or your blue, green, whatever, just enough to go over all your prime surfaces and to cover them, and it's nice and even. Because you got to remember, the more coats of paint that you spray on, whether it's blue, green, red, whatever, that the tone becomes darker and much darker. So if you use gold color paint and it's got a metallic in it, whatever, and the more coats of gold that you put on, that gold tone becomes darker and darker the more coats that you put on. So you really shouldn't put too many coats on. Just, you know, use enough just to cover over all the primer, and that you have a uniform paint coat over all your primer, and just stop right there. You don't need any more paint after that. It's just a waste of expensive materials. You don't need it. Then you move over to your clear coat and start spraying your clear coat over that, and it's fine. You want to put on 4, 5, 6 coats of clear coat, you know, make your paint job a little bit deeper. That's all fine and dandy, but don't produce a thick paint job. You want to make your paint job thin, because it's going to last much, much longer with a nice thin paint job. And the more paint coats you put on, it doesn't mean anything. It's not going to last longer. It's not going to last as long. As a matter of fact, like I said, it's going to begin to crack into spider web. So don't go crazy putting too many coats of your base color on, okay? Just enough to cover all your primer in a nice even way. Stop right there and run over to the bench and load up on your clear and start spraying your clear over your base coats, and leave it at that. Keep your paint jobs thin, guys. Don't go too thick, all right? Well, I finally have a good day to paint today. Not a lot of wind outside. And inside my garage, it's about, let's see, it's about 72 degrees or so. So that's a good temperature to paint in over here. And I have the tables all set up. I have the plastic all on the tables. And I have the fenders set up so I have easy access. So when I'm going to spray, I have access to both sides. Not a problem there. And they're all set up to spray. And on the gas tanks as well over here, I have them all set up so it's easy to have access on both the front and the back and left and right sides. Okay, and that's how I'm going to set them up right here. So when I'm spraying, I got full access. I don't have to stretch, and I have full access to the gas tanks on all sides. And we'll be mixing our birch white 2-to-1, and 2 parts of birch white to 1 part of reducer. Stir it up a little bit. Make sure it's mixed properly all the way. We're going to pour the birch white paint and bring it up to 2-to-1 over here. And I'm going to come up to the 5. About right there. And see how far that gets us. And if we need more paint, and then I'll pour more paint. But I'm going to start out with the 5 first. And add our reducer to that. As I said, it's 2-to-1. And we'll bring the reducer up to the next 5, which is right up there. A little bit more. A touch more. That should do it. Stir that up. I couldn't bring my new camera into the spray area because all that overspray would get over the lens and it would destroy my camera. But this is the paint job. Now this is the third coat. Now I still have to apply all my graphics and then apply all the clear coat on top of the graphics. So this is going to be a much deeper looking paint job than what it is now, and it's going to shine a whole lot more than what it is. That being said, birch white cannot stand on its own. It needs a lot of help. Here's the third coat of birch white on the tanks. As of right now, I could stop painting after my third coat. But I have a little bit more paint left in my gun, so I'm going to come back and give these tanks a fourth coat of birch white and finish off all the paint in my spray gun. And remember, never ever run low on paint on your last coat of paint, because you'll destroy your paint job. You'll throw blotches all over the place. So always make sure you have enough paint. The last coat's on, and I'm going to let it flash dry here. And I'm through for the night. And it turned out perfectly. I don't have any dust in my paint or anything. It turned out really, really well. And I'm really happy with it. Now there's a backstory to this tone of birch white paint. When you first spray it on, you're going to be disappointed because it's going to have a yellow tone to it, which is going to disappoint you. And you're going to think that, oh my goodness, they mixed the wrong tone of paint. But that's not the case. You got to let this paint set up and dry, and it starts to lighten up a little bit. But I'm going to do a longer story about this birch white tone here. I'm probably part 7 or 8 or something like that. Because when you first spray this tone of birch white, it's kind of going to freak you out. And you're going to be very disappointed and wonder what's going on. So we'll get more into that. And that's that. The paint job's done. Now to put on the graphics, and then a clear coat over the graphics. And this 1971 Sparkling America paint scheme is going to be finished. And don't forget to tune in to part 7 next week, because we're going to do a dry run. I'm going to show you how I physically move my arm right across the paint surfaces on all my paint jobs, which is very, very important. It's a lot different from the physical movement of my arm when I'm doing paints and all my clear coats as to how I, say, am painting a high build primer, and how I kind of hodgepodge jump around and it, around the fuel tank and all my paint surfaces with a high build primer. So next week I'm going to show you the exact arm movement and techniques that I use when I'm spraying my clear coats and my paints, so you can achieve a beautiful professional paint job. Until then, thank you again for watching Max and Tillison. You guys take good care of yourselves, ride safe out there, and I will see you guys next week on part 7. Take care.